Cool.
This meeting is being recorded.
For everyone joining us, if you have any question, please use the chat. Write your question in the chat. Once the time feels right, we will address the question. Toward the end, we can have a time where you can open your mic and answer a question. But during the presentation, just write your question in the chat and we address them as we go.
Prudencio, can you monitor the chat while we're going, and just so we
Yes.
Because I might miss. I'll open it up, but I might miss.
No problem. Take care of that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll share the recording. As long as there's not, as long as we don't get sort of Zoom bombed or anything like that. But yeah, no, we'll definitely share the recording, and if anything like that happens, we'll. Yeah. All right. I think people are joining. Yeah, let's get started. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's this is fun. This is the first time we're doing this, so we're still figuring it out. But hopefully it's useful for everyone. And let's dive right into it. I wanted to just do a kind of quick set of introductions to the four of us who are going to be presenting today. We've got Dhanya Sridhar, she's a professor at the University of Montreal, and Mila, which is not called the Montreal Institute of Learning Algorithms anymore, but you can think of it as like this research institution for machine learning that houses faculty from all the Montreal-based university. It also happens to be where we're all currently located, even though we're at different institutions. So we all are in Montreal, Canada at the moment, and we all work in the Mila building. So Dhanya did a PhD at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And so she's got some experience in the US system, which tends to look pretty similar to the Canadian system. But the rest of us all did our studies, most of our sort of grad school studies in Canada. And so this is Canada focused only because that's where we've got the most experience, but we're obviously happy to take questions, everywhere else. I'm Jason. I'm currently a staff research scientist at Valence Labs, where I work with Prudencio. And from next year, I'll be a professor at the University of Waterloo. I did my undergrad and master's in economics at Wits University in South Africa. So I've got experience from South Africa as well. I'm born in South Africa. But then did a master's and PhD in Canada and a postdoc as well. Roy is a PhD student at McGill University here in Montreal, which is also at Mila. He also did his he did a master's at Wits, his honors at UCT, and an undergrad at UKZN. So he's got sort of all the major universities in South Africa experience. And he's particularly useful because he's kind of gone through this process most recently of us. So as a PhD student, he's done it relatively recently. And finally, Prudencio, he's got a bit of a different path. He got into the University of Laval, also here in Montreal, for his undergrad, and ended up doing his master's and PhD here as well. He then founded a startup called Valence Discovery, which was later acquired, and that's how we ended up working together in what's now known as Valence Labs. So he's interesting both from the sort of full undergrad to PhD path, rather than sort of switching over to the North American system in grad school, which is more common. And then he's also kind of done the startup thing, which I'm sure some of you are probably interested in, and you can ask about questions about that later. Cool. Okay. Now, while we're here, I think the main reason for all of us is this sort of very depressing statistic, which is at the last International Conference on Machine Learning, which is one of the two largest conferences in machine learning in the sort of main area where people publish their work. Only 6 out of the 7,000 attendees were registered as from Africa. Now that's that's just way too little. Like, yeah, I don't know what the right number is, but it's not 6. And we really want to see that change. And I think the way to change that is by growing the pool of strong machine learning candidates who are in this ecosystem. On the application side, we just see a lot more applications from everywhere else in the world than Africa, right? I've seen it now as an incoming professor at the University of Waterloo, where I get a lot of emails from all over the world and none from Africa. I know Dhanya sees a little bit more because she's in a Francophone university, so she sees a bit more from Francophone Africa than what is normal in Canada. But still just like way less than we feel like we should be seeing, given how talented the students in Africa are. And then, we've all been fortunate in that we've had the opportunity to kind of go through grad school in North America. In Roy's case, in the process of going through grad school in North America. But I think it's important to emphasize that, like, we're not exceptionally smart or talented. We did well relative to our peers in undergrad, but not like in a way that is, we weren't sort of shooting the lights out, being crazy impressive. Like we just kind of knew enough to put ourselves out there in the application process by some way or another. We sort of were encouraged by a peer, or encouraged by a professor, or encouraged by family to actually just put ourselves out there and apply. And the thing that I think we're all concerned about, and certainly I'm concerned about, is that talented people from Africa end up self-selecting out of the field because they're worried that it's either too expensive, or they're not good enough, or some other reason, which I would love to hear if you can post sort of reasons that you might not apply to grad school anywhere. It doesn't have to be in Canada for this question. Feel free to post it in the chat, and we'll try and address it, or at least, even if we don't address it, it'll be interesting to know kind of the reasons that people are choosing not to apply, because obviously you're never going to get any opportunities if you don't apply. So that's the first step. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to try and talk over what the application process looks like, and go over some detail about sort of what the steps that you have to go through, the things you have to prepare in order to apply. Then we're going to cover what grad school looks like in Canada, just a brief sort of overview of roughly what it looks like to study in Canada. We'll cover where to think about applying, and the main reason I've put this here is I found, at least when I was applying, that it's really hard to know, even what universities are out there. You kind of Google things, but like, if you're not from Canada, or you're not from the States, you just kind of miss a lot of you just don't know where to even look. So I think it's helpful to sort of see the sort of breadth of places you can apply to, and especially at the moment, because machine learning is so competitive, that it's helpful to have, at least one safety university, which is not sort of the most popular place to go to, but can still lead you to like really good outcomes. If you apply to a good person at a less well-known university, often they're just as good as the people at the good universities, and I even kind of want to work harder with you because they're kind of more excited about it. So yeah. And then we'll talk through some of our experiences applying from African universities. We'll get Roy to talk through his story. If we have time, I can tell you mine. And Prudencio may give some words about his as well. We'll see how much time we have, and we can kind of gauge that last bit there. Okay, so let's dive right into it. I'm curious about the cool. Okay, so I'll actually address that. Let me come back to that when we get to the thing, because I also have a bit of an unusual background. Okay, so to apply, you typically need 4 things. Actually, for many of you, it will just be 3 things, which is your CV, your academic transcript, and then 3 letters of recommendation, at least 2 of which are from academics. And and then if you have not studied in an English language university, you'll typically need an English language proficiency exam. Now, obviously, I should say at this point, everything I say today is going to be like generic, mostly true things, but things will vary a lot as you look through different universities. At least in Canada and North America, these kind of three things are the main things you need, but there might be specific requirements for specific universities. So don't take this as like the gold standard. It's just the sort of thing that you need most of the places. Now, in Canada, you typically you apply first to a master's and then a PhD, unless you already have a master's. And I've even known of people who have masters from their home country and still do another master's in Canada. And, you know, but so that varies. I mean, in fact, I was kind of that case, although I had a master's in economics and then did a master's in computer science when I got to Canada. In the US, it's more normal to go straight from undergrad into PhD. So I know certainly from a South African perspective, that was really weird. We always thought like you had to have a master's in order to do a PhD. The US system is just different, where they'll have slightly longer PhD programs, but you'll do you do masters and PhD. You will typically, when you're applying, you'll typically have the option of choosing between a thesis and a coursework option. Sometimes it's whether it's at the application process or after you get in, that varies, but there's typically those two options. For a lot of people, the thesis option is kind of the right option. It's for a couple of things. It gets you the opportunity to do some research, and it's sometimes a bit cheaper. We'll get to that at the end. The professional masters is nice, where you're just doing coursework. You have to do less of a thesis at the end of the masters, and you do more courses. So you do, I think, at UBC, where I did my PhD, I think it was like 6 courses for the thesis option and 9 for the PhD for the professional masters. I might be getting that wrong, but I think that's right. But that's sort of what ends up happening. So you do slightly more courses and less thesis, and a much sort of shorter research component in the masters. But you'll usually be able to switch to the professional masters, although there's sort of a coursework option if things aren't working out on a research level. And so it's a kind of keeping your options open perspective. It's often the right choice. Okay. Some details, specifically for South African students. In South Africa, we kind of do a 3-year undergrad, and then what in many parts of the world is the 4th year is called an honors year in South Africa, and that's treated as a postgrad degree in South Africa. Most of the rest of the world, it's just a 4-year undergrad, and the honors year would be treated as part of the as part of your undergrad. And so this is a strange kind of thing if you're reading it from, if you're someone who's a professor in Canada who's never had any experience with this strange honors thing. So it's just like, this is the kind of thing that you can just either ask one of your letter writers who's writing your letter of recommendation, or in your statement of purpose, you can just write at the end some sort of little notes on how your system differs, or even just when you're writing your CV, just write honors as though it's part of your undergrad. That also works. The GRE is a graduate entry exam, if you haven't heard of it. And historically in the States particularly, you needed it to apply anywhere. In Canada, it varied quite a bit. I think even when I was applying, it was optional at UBC. At some Canadian universities required it, some didn't. Most Canadian universities now don't require it, as far as I know. And if you've done it though, if you're sort of applying to the States and applying to Canada, it's still worth sending it, I think, because it's a nice way of dealing with the point which I'm making on the next point is it's a standardized test. And so if you're doing really well on your GRE and you get sort of high grades on it, that's a strong signal that you're a smart student anyway. You don't, even if the grades, because grades vary wildly across countries, the sort of absolute number grade. And so the GRE is a sort of standard test that everyone does. And so it's useful if you've got it, but it's not required anymore. So it's also a ton of work preparing for the GRE, and in order to do some, like, learn these skills that you kind of never use again in a weird way. They're like these, I don't know, if you haven't done the GRE, it's like really tricky to do. You have to just get really good at spotting how to solve these tricky word problems and math problems. And so it does take a lot of work to do well in it. And so if you haven't done it, you get more value from some of the other things we'll talk about on this slide. I mentioned here grade inflation in North America. This is kind of part of the broader point, which is just that there is a wild variance in like what the absolute number grade is across the world, right? So in North America, an A, Dhanya, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think an A starts at 80 or 85. And you need like 95 to be an A plus, or 90. I can't remember.
It varies, but at UDEM, it's something like 92 and above is an A plus, I believe.
There you go. Okay, so whereas like when I was studying at Wits in South Africa, an A was 75, and I can't remember what an A plus was, but point is, it's just like there's a big variance, and at least in South Africa, it was like not uncommon for you to do well with a 60. Like you did well relative to the rest of your class. You got, you were doing good, but you just got a 60, and that was fine. That was just the number they wrote on the transcript. I was looking, in preparing for this, I was looking at my transcript from when I was an undergrad and masters. I had a lot of 50s and 60s on my transcript. And so there's just like this massive variance. We talked about it in preparing for this, whether kind of to what extent this makes a difference. And I think Dhanya brought up a good point, which is that often the first filtering step in these applications is a bunch of grad students, not the professors, look through the 1,000 odd applications that arrive and pick the best, I don't know how many X, 50 or so. And so you just want to make sure you don't get filtered out at that stage. Like that would be sad. And so, if you've done well relative to your class, but your grade you've got with a 60, it's worth just mentioning that, either asking your professors to mention it in the statement of purpose, or you mention it in your statement of purpose. Sorry, letter of recommendation or your statement of purpose. So just make sure that you don't get filtered out kind of because there's just a difference in grades. Prudencio brought up when we were preparing for this that universities do tend to be relatively good at knowing how to convert grades from one country to another. But even so, better to be cautious. And especially like the professors don't necessarily know that as well. Okay, another one that's the whole sort of spiel I wanted to tell today was put yourself out there, apply, do it. The one little sticking point in this is these applications are expensive, and they're way more expensive than any of us like. It's typical to cost around 120 Canadian dollars. If this is helpful, if there are any South Africans in the room, I'm actually not sure if there are. That's like 6,600 Rand, just less than $100 US. Yeah, it's a lot. And if you're doing this, often you want to apply for 5 or 6 places because many people apply to more than that, and that ends up being a big expense. And so the best advice I can give is, like, if you are the kind of student who you feel you feel like you've done a good job, or your research statement you've done well relative to your peers, you're the kind, you should be in this pool, but you just can't afford it. I would encourage you to reach out to universities, because sometimes they're prepared to waive the fee if you've got a good reason. Obviously, don't abuse this. This is meant for students who can't afford it, but it is, if you can't afford it, it's better to reach out than to not apply, right? So yeah.
Maybe Jason, there's a question in the chat that I think maybe it's worth speaking on briefly. Somebody asked explicitly, what are the grade expectations for PhD applications, and are they hard constraints, or can they be compensated for by experience? Maybe I'll start just saying a few things about this, and then the rest of you can add your perspective. There are no hard and fast grade constraints. I think that when we review applications, of course, we look at grades and transcripts in particular, but I think we look with an eye to just to kind of see, okay, well, my research topic has to do with probabilistic machine learning, so I may look to see specifically, do you have some experience with courses like linear algebra or probability and statistics? And of course, I can't help but see what grade you got in that class, but for example, routinely I get applications where students say, look, it seems like I got these very mediocre grades, but it's actually because my classes were particularly hard, and I was also trying to take a lot of them at the same time, and I was also trying to do research at that time. And if you notice, like, I started off kind of mediocre, but it started to do better. And these are all things that I and others pay attention to. I'd like to also emphasize what Jason is saying here. So your grades, if the absolute numbers seem unimpressive or something, if you mention this in your CV, we take note. If your letter writers mention how well you did on your assignments and courses relative to your classmates, we definitely pay attention to these things. And moreover, it is definitely not that transcripts are something that we filter students out by. So we may take notice, but if you have really interesting research experience, if you have internships, if you're a very, very strong coder and you've participated in a bunch of hackathons, these are all things that very well add to your resume, I would say, that we pay attention to. So if you feel like your transcript is not your strongest suit, just don't count yourself out. You may have many, many other things to offer that actually we profs definitely pay attention to when we review applications. So that's my take. I don't know if the rest of you want to add some stuff.
I think I just basically agree. I think finding ways to differentiate yourself in other ways is just very effective. So like Dhanya said, participating in hackathons, doing some research, finding in general, I think, like, finding the thing that makes you different from others is a really effective strategy. So in my case, and then also trying to find the thing that makes you different from others, and then the professor who you best match to with that thing, right? So in my case, I had a master's in economics, and I was applying to computer science grad school. So I found a professor who's very well known in the AI world, but he works on in the intersection of economics and machine learning. And so while I certainly was not the top student in machine learning in general or in computer science in general, I got to be kind of a strong econ machine learning student. And so sort of it can help to like find your niche in some sense, find the thing that you do differently that sets you apart. Right? Go for it.
Yeah, I just want to second what you just said, because I think I'm going to touch on it a little bit. in my experience, I think a thing that can set you apart, because I agree with what was mentioned previously, that grades are not a hard constraint. But I think that could really set you apart if you're fortunate enough to be in this position, is to basically explore a research topic that is not very, not very common, and find the professor that speaks towards this. Like in the case of Jason, it was like economics and machine learning. In my case, it was like neuroscience and machine learning, which at the time, and I think still today to some extent, is not a very popular intersection. And I think people are just looking for people who are really interested in just diving into this area. So I think that a way to be competitive in these applications is to really look at these type of niches that set you apart from other candidates.
To add to what have been said, like let's say your grades are not perfect or far from perfect, and you are trying to apply for a PhD, you are not having any chance of getting into, maybe downgrade and apply for a master, right? Or maybe ask your prof, like, is it possible to take, I'm not the strongest in math, but I'm open to take some courses to kind of get better in that area that I'm not the strongest in. But definitely make sure that you emphasis in your application what make you better than other people, like your strength. Don't focus only on the negative, like, because like that's only one part of your story.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, so academic CV, let's start with that, because that was the first on the bullet points. And I've kind of we got Roy's CV, which is a great CV, and we got mine, which is an okay CV. And I intentionally put them both up because I think there's actually, I'm going to get Dhanya to speak to these, because she's looked at the most of them out of all of us. But you can but there's sort of things about both of them that they have in common. This was mine at the time I was applying to grad school, and it's Roy's at the time he was applying as well.
Yeah, so there are good things about both these CVs. So let's start with Jason. So already what's kind of very nice is there's a very clear structure to the CV, right? So there are very clear categories, and right away my eye is drawn to his education background, and some of his other experiences. And we'll notice that like everything on the CV is very pertinent to what he's applying for, right? Which is for a graduate student position. There isn't much detail on here that is sort of from the perspective of a reviewer of a grad student application is irrelevant. Jason's only mentioning the most relevant experiences that he's had relative to what a grad student application reviewer might want to see. And what's nice here is that, like, Jason previously when we were talking about this mentioned like, oh, I didn't have a ton of experience. I mean, I would argue his research experience that he's highlighted here is already very nice, but in addition to listing his experiences, there's a little paragraph here on his research interests. Like that helps to, again, just center like what is his vision, what is his main objective. These kinds of details are really nice. What I would add is like Jason has left out those details under his education about like, I was in the top blah percent of my class, or this was exactly my thesis topic. Those extra details are fantastic to add, especially if highlighting them gives a lot more context to your application. But the key thing here is it's structured really nicely, and for somebody who has minutes to kind of really spend with each application, it is very, very easy to read and just process all of the key details. So just kind of keep that like structure in mind. Now, if we go over to Roy, again, Roy's is very, very, very nicely structured. Your eye is immediately drawn to all of the key details that he wants you to pay attention to. You see that, information is presented in a very, very kind of nice and compact way. We get to see what proficiencies Roy has, but it's not taking up a ton of space. And so he's able to present a lot of information in a very small amount of space. I think like in Roy's case, you're immediately first drawn to his research experiences. And that's really what, you're immediately wanting to spend time on. His education courses is on the kind of right-hand side. You kind of naturally get to that a little bit later. But even so, all the things that you want to see are bolded and are in clean bullets and, presented in a way that you can immediately find that information. Roy has really nice like links to key, GitHub pages or pages of labs he's worked in. That's very nice to do. If one thing that I wanted to highlight with all of these is, of course, some people are very fortunate to have a lot of research experiences before they apply to grad school. I actually had virtually no research experience. In this scenario, what you can do is highlight projects that you've done for courses. And if there are GitHub pages associated with those projects, you can put them on your CV. So we don't see much of this, these GitHub links on these example CVs, but you're totally welcome to post short form URLs to all the different GitHub pages that you would like to, or just link to your GitHub page at the very top of the CV. So these are both things you can do. Prudencio, anybody else on thoughts?
Yes. I think, yeah, I agree with everything that Dhanya has said. Like, it's great. On Jason's CV, there's even though he didn't kind of put a lot of details in education and research, I think there's two things worth mentioning: the teaching experiences, and the award. Like, and for most like part of your graduate studies, if you want, you can have opportunity to be teaching assistant. And if your prof is looking for a teaching assistant, that's something that can definitely play in your favor, right? So it's worth, even if though it's not related to your research, it's still like an academic experience that's valuable. So it's worth putting there. And the award as well, like, show that, okay, some people have reckon this person as kind of excellent in particular discipline, and even if he's not explicitly putting top 1% or top 10% of his class, this award excellence award and show that, okay, some people recognize that he's great at something, so that's also important. On Roy's CV, like, my best thing is the smallest part, that the skill part here at the top. It doesn't have anything to do with his research experience, but it shows that the candidate has touched many different things. And maybe all those things will not be relevant to his research, but at least it shows, okay, from a programming perspective, he has taught at least two languages, Java and Python. That's not something you see these days. Most people only know one language and they are good in it. And he has also some cloud experience. He's AWS, Azure, or whatever. And so all that is kind of something that at least me kind of hiring research student, I will kind of value a lot. The academic service at the bottom as well. I don't we have some research experience, that's nice, but being reviewer kind of to a journal, also great experience to highlight. And I think if you were asking Ray when he was applying, if those things are kind of the most important part of his CV, I'm sure he will say no, because he put a lot of effort maybe in explaining his research and how like everything he did in his research. But those things also have kind of are very valuable and worth putting in your CV. One last comment: both CV are only one page. And please avoid the long CV of 3 page or whatever. You can have a nice CV, very comprehensive CV in one page, and always strive for that, because we have like hundreds of CV to go over, and the best you can do for yourself is kind of be concise and have a CV that's kind of short enough and not 10 pages.
I just want to add a little before we move on to the next slide, and it's a bit cringe having to see your CV on a presentation like this, but and this is something that I like in Jason's presentation, that I kind of struggled with my CV, that I personally think, as somebody, if I was given a CV, I'd like to see it this way, is like using less words. I think in my CV I used quite a lot of words, and I think Jason, he quite nicely captures like the key details in like a few bullet points, which I think is also the way to go. Not only just having one page, but also trying to ensure that you are able to nicely summarize some of your key contributions.
Cool. Yeah, one thing I think, one last thing is I think what Prudencio mentioned about like sort of the other small things is a good point around, you know, often you're in this equivalence class, like there are a lot of, you know, they make like 10 candidates who all have really strong CVs, and it can be the sort of thing that you didn't think is that important that actually sets you apart in amongst a group of people who have all got strong things. You know, it's like once you kind of got into that crew of like a bunch of good people, it's like, well, there's something different about that candidate that helps set them apart, and so it's weird how these small things can make a difference. Yes, it is absolutely normal to feel with imposter syndrome. I feel like I should go grab that transcript of mine, because it's like I felt like an imposter the entire way through my my grad school student life, because I think yeah, it's everyone feels. Remember, the CVs as well is like you are trying to paint the best version of yourself, and so if you're like looking at someone else's CV, that is their like the best picture they're trying to put forward. And so, you know, it's a little bit like looking at people's lives through Instagram. You know, their lives look amazing through Instagram, because they've kind of they've crafted this best version of what they look like, and they don't post the sort of the downsides, you know. So keep that in mind when we're doing all of this. Okay, letters of recommendation. So this one's hard, because I struggled with this. I think I'm sure others here struggled with this. Like finding universities require 3 letters of recommendation, and especially if you haven't had a lot of research experience, maybe you've done like just done coursework, or maybe you've done like research with one prof if you're lucky. Where are you going to get 3 people to write you letters? And it seems like you're asking a big job of a professor, which, to be clear, I mean, it is you know, a bunch of work that a professor has to sit down and write a letter for you, but know that professors know that this is necessary. Like professors know that this is like just part of the grad school process. Like I had like a real hang up about asking people, because I kind of felt like I was imposing this big thing on them. And I remember my professor at UBC just saying to me, it's part of the job. This is just like something that we have to sign, you know, it's one of the things that we just have to do as a professor. You have to do a lot of things that you don't necessarily want to do. And for students, you often want to write a good letter for them, you know, like, but it's just like, it's a part of the job. And especially if they're familiar with the overseas universities, they'll see it that way. Not every professor, you know, if you're in a country that doesn't have as much of a recommended letters of recommendation system, they might not be as familiar with this. So that's tricky, but if you've got those who have done their studies in like, the best thing, like the ideal letter writers are those who have like studied in North America, because then they are very familiar with the system, right? So they'll really understand that this is just part of the job. But you know, work with what you can. Some ways that you can make it easier for a letter writer to write a great letter. The ideal option is to do some work, to work with them on research. like a great letter is a letter that sort of says, you know, Jason worked with me on this project. He worked really well. He had this neat idea on this problem that we were kind of struggling with, and you know, and using that, we were able to make some progress on research. You know, maybe if we're really lucky, we were able to send it to a conference or a workshop. But you know, honestly, just like even just being able to, like, the great letters can be very specific about what the student did, and it's way easier to be very specific about what the student did if you've actually worked together. So that's why sort of working together on research is particularly good. Taking a class is obviously like the kind of next best option. This is like one place where you're really rewarded for being interactive in class, or it's one of the many places where like society rewards people who are outspoken and talk a lot, in a way perhaps more than they should. And so, you know, if you're interacting with the professor a lot, they'll remember you more, and so it's easier for them to write you a letter because they kind of can talk about the good questions you asked in class and insightful comments, and you know, and then in addition to the usual stuff about, you know, where you sat in the class they took, or you know, those kinds of things. If you're lucky enough to have more than 3 options, I certainly wasn't in this case, and I think probably many of us aren't, but then you can try and think about how the different letters complement each other, right? So if you have sort of different professors who have seen you in very different contexts, that can be useful, because it can paint, like, you just have to think about, like, when you're choosing this, think about someone's going to be reading all of this, and if they all, you know, if all 3 letters are saying exactly the same thing, that's obviously less useful than 3 saying, you know, different things, because then it kind of gives you, like, they kind of trying to paint a complete picture. There's kind of 4 things that are painting a picture of you. It's the 3 letters and then your own statement of purpose, and that's sort of trying to tell this reader everything about you as quickly as you can. This is a nice point, which is like, give them at least three weeks notice and a list of places that you're planning to apply along with deadlines. This is one that, like, I have failed on in the past, you know, sending like frantic letters to professors at the last minute saying, please write a letter for me. Don't do that. Don't be me. You know, often professors are very nice and will help you out, but it's just not the way to get a good letter. And then give them your CV and a draft of your research statements. That'll help them think about like how they can tailor their letter, both have more information about you, but also tailor their letter to tell something that maybe you're not saying in your statement of purpose or your research statement, or like things that they've noticed about you that you've missed or stuff like that would be, you know, a particularly thoughtful letter. Dhanya, do you want to say your take?
Yeah, totally. So the thing about letters of recommendations is it's definitely tricky. We're receiving such global applications, and for me as a prof and for my colleagues, for example, we don't always know every different institution or every other prof that works at these institutions who would be your potential letter writers. And so what we really try to do is to try to keep this as level of a playing field as possible. We really try to pay attention to how the letter writer would describe the actions of the candidate, especially when it can be placed relative to the context that you're in. This helps a lot. So for example, things that really draw the attention would be if your letter writer says, for example, you know, so-and-so took my class, and, you know, I noticed that they were particularly attentive and engaged in the discussion. So, you know, whereas a lot of the other students were kind of passively participating, this student was really engaged. They were helping their classmates. I noticed them kind of wanting to ask and sort of ask a lot of questions and participate in the discussion. These are the kinds of things that stand out. And if your letter writer, for example, is able to highlight that, you know, you're in the top X% of the grad student or of the students that they have interacted with, this is the kind of comparison that can be very useful, and that is sort of standardized in the way that a GRE is standardized. So we do pay attention to these kinds of things.
Right. Okay, so that's letters of recommendation, which someone else writes. Then there's the statement of purpose, which you write. And I don't know, Dhanya, do you want to just take this actually?
Totally. Yeah. Good. So let's just start by saying, like, what is the goal of this statement of purpose, right? And the main goal of this is that you want to succinctly convey what is your research topic of interest. You want to give a little bit of background on why you think it's important, why it's important according to, you know, other cited papers in the field. And then finally, you want to spend some time giving some evidence that you can in fact do this research that you're suggesting to do. Okay, so that's a high level goal of what this statement is supposed to achieve. And again, the length requirements, there's huge variation, so pay very close attention to what the instructions of the application say, but you should expect that it's gonna be less than 2 pages. So this is short, right? So this is one of these very tricky things that, for example, I think I probably, when I've had to write different research statements, I spend the most amount of time on this thing, and it's very normal to maybe write, as you know, up to 4 or 5 drafts of this thing. So if it's taking a lot of time and you're finding that you're, you know, it's taking a lot of your energy, that's totally normal. Now, because it's so short, it really helps to give this a lot of structure. It helps you, it helps the reader. So here's just a suggestion, right? You don't have to take this very literally, but what I think I look for is about a third of a page where the student is introducing the topic and giving some background preliminaries to motivate it. And if you want to, you can even have a bolded sentence that kind of says, my research vision is blah, blah, blah. Keep it concise, keep this sentence kind of short and punchy. But you know, you have this opening paragraph that is your introductory paragraph that can be very powerful as a tool because it's the first thing that somebody reads. And oftentimes that's what they spend the most time on, unfortunately. You can spend about a half to 3/4 of a page then describing relevant parts of your experience that maybe provide evidence as to why you are a candidate who can do this work. If you've done relevant research to this, highlight it. You can use bold to make those, draw attention to those relevant research experiences. If you haven't done research in this topic, but you've, for example, taken courses and done well in them and done course projects that you feel are relevant, or internships, or hackathons, or anything that you think is kind of concisely giving some evidence as to why you can do this research, you can include it in this section. And then lastly, you'll get a bit more space to kind of talk about the future, right? And here you want to explain who you want to work with at the department that you're applying to and why. And for this, you may want to kind of point out how their recent work pertains to the topic that you're describing. And so to do this, of course, you have to do a little bit of research. And I'm going to use this as an opportunity to address a question that was also in the chat as to, like, how do you even find which profs to work with? So this takes a bit of research, but the things that you can look for is on the profs page or even on their social media presence. The profs who are actively recruiting will often post that they're looking for students this application season. So look for these kinds of signs on their page saying, okay, they're looking. And pay attention to kind of the papers they've published in the last few years. And if they're keeping their page updated, they'll often say what are their most relevant research interests right now. So you can try to gather in your own mind a bit of a portfolio on the profs that you are interested in working with and what their interest may be at this time, and try to explain why they are a good candidate for you as a supervisor in this sort of last half to 1/3 of a page. And then finally, there's just some general writing tips. So, use bolding to draw attention, but of course don't overuse this, because if you have way too much stuff in bold, then it becomes not a useful signal anymore. Absolutely feel free to use bolded paragraph titles to provide structure. So if you want to say introduction, undergraduate research, coursework, paragraph titles are fantastic. So feel free to use these liberally. And my kind of general take is be precise and clear about the ideas that you're presenting in this research statement. Personally, this is just my stylistic thing. I would avoid starting with kind of more anecdotes and quotes. Like I do receive a lot of statements where people quote Einstein and then start by talking about how, they've always just found AI to be so magical and like understanding this is their goal. This is nice, but the thing is, at the end of the day, everybody writes this and it just doesn't add anything. So, you really have to be very economical with your words in a research statement. So the best thing you can do is use that space to show to the reader of your statement, right, these key elements: that you're an independent thinker, that you're driven by a clear vision, you can articulate research problems in a concise manner, and that you have some maturity in problem solving and just even being able to identify what are research questions. Okay, so these are the things that you're tasked with doing in the statement of purpose. And what I would sort of encourage you to do is, if you can find somebody to give you feedback, right, even just your friends in your department, the more eyes you can get on this, the better. And take feedback liberally, ask for feedback liberally, and don't feel bad if you're spending a lot of time on this. This is we all do this. This is one of the few pieces of writing you really feel like you can control. And so it's totally okay to sink a lot of time into this. So those are my tips. And yeah, if others want to add stuff, please jump in.
I just wanna basically just hone in on that point of feedback. Like, feedback is so important. Like, it's so easy. I know I struggled with this when I was much more younger, that when you're writing something, it sounds and feels good to you, and you sort of have this impression that it's it's fine. But like, having extra eyes on it makes your application 1,000 times better. It might in the beginning be a lot to take in, because oftentimes it's like, remove this sentence, rephrase this, and it's a bit of a slippery slope. Well, not a slippery slope, but it's not a direct line. But when it's done, it's you will definitely thank yourself for having taken in some feedback.
First thing, please don't use ChatGPT for your research statement. Like, it will be generic and everyone will do that. Don't do that. Okay. This is the time to think about what you want to do. Like, a PhD or a master, especially a PhD, is a long journey. And like, if you don't take the time to convince yourself and about what you want to do, why it's important to you, quickly 1-2 years in, you find yourself asking a lot of questions and even close to abandoning that program. And if you think that's kind of a weird thing to say, in the US and in Canada, I think it's roughly about 50% of people who drop out of their PhD. So taking the time to think about, if I have 4 years of my life to spend on a subject, what would that subject be? Reading about the people who are the prof, the people who are working that field is critical, because that's the only way that you're gonna know if like is important, really important to you. And as Dhanya was saying, it will take time, and that's fine. 1 week, a few weeks is completely fine. But don't skip the hard work of reading papers. Don't skip the hard work of going, watching tutorials, like all the big conferences, like in machine learning, in mathematics. The talks, the tutorial are publicly available a few weeks after the event. So they're all online, and you can learn a ton about a research field by just watching those talks that are pre-recorded for you. So just do that hard work, spend the time to write a great statement. And even for people saying, okay, I'm gonna reach out to a professor like directly by email, the professor will receive a ton of emails. But if you put in the work of kind of writing a great statement, your email will be different. Your email will be different. You won't be, okay, hi, I'm so, and like, I'm interested in working with you. No, I'm so, I'm interested by this field. I know about your work, and this part is very interesting to me. And I really want if to see if there's an opportunity to kind of do something here. I'm even open to maybe dive deep into this topic before even joining your group. And your research may be different if you put in the hard work. Don't skip the hard work on this one. And as Daniel was saying, mostly the only thing at this point that's depending on you. Your CV, your CV is kind of your past experience is already done. Your transcript, you cannot do anything about it at this point. Your recommendation letters is on other people's hand, but your statement is all on you. So put in the hard work at this point to make it successful.
Yeah.
I just wanted to second all of that. That is so true. And I think it's just so true that when I'm reading these research statements, I am really not looking to see if, I mean, of course, I'm looking to see if the candidate is aligned with my research interests. I'm reading between the lines to see, okay, can they kind of, will they be drawn to the same vision that I have? But at the same time, what I'm really looking for is to what extent they've really engaged with the field and have some clarity and have almost formulated their own research curiosity. So the kinds of things that don't help would be, you know, somebody just goes to my website and picks the top 3 papers and either sends me an email or in their research statement says, I read your paper, blah, 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 and I found it really inspiring. Because that is anybody can say that they found something inspiring, but you'd really want to kind of signal, you know, what about that problem you think is interesting and relevant and important to the field, why. And actually, I wanted to just highlight that one more thing is you can actually have more space for references. So if you want to cite papers, if you want to cite your own work or good relevant papers, absolutely feel free. You can have a references section, and that's also a nice way to signal that you've done your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, we don't, I realize we're belaboring this, but I think this is the one part of the application that you kind of have the most control over. So I think it's worth spending a little bit of extra time on this. I completely agree with what Dhanya and Prudencio said. I think Prudencio made a really good point about watching people's talks. Like if there was someone who you think, well, maybe they're going to align well with me, there is nothing better than just watching their talk for getting an idea of what they're interested in at the moment. And there are a lot of talks online, so you can kind of get a really good sense of what a researcher is, kind of what they're aligned with, and what are the sort of motivating questions they're interested in that may not come through as clearly through the papers. You know, that's sort of something that's like when I give talks now, I'll talk about the kind of big vision of something that I want to solve, and then I'll talk about some specific things that we've made progress on, but they may not have solved that big vision. And so that can be a good way of understanding kind of where the researchers that you're interested in are working. And then I think just, you know, to echo this, like, I know I can speak to my own experience. I had average at best transcript. I had some research, a little bit of research experience because I'd worked a little bit at Wits University as a lecturer, so I had some time to work on a paper. But I think my statement of purpose was really the thing that set me apart in my application, because I kind of put in the time to sort of argue for a particular point that I was making. It doesn't, the point doesn't matter, but you know, I was able to differentiate myself by just sort of showing that I'd spent a lot of time, and it really did take me, it took me a ton of time to figure out what I wanted, you know, what was interesting about this. Like, it's not, you kind of, it's almost like an exercise in figuring out like what research is interesting, and what do I find exciting, and that requires some self-reflection, because you're kind of saying what is it that I want to spend a bunch of time on. But having said all of that, it's worth keeping in mind that like what you think you're going to spend a whole lot of time in when you're writing your statement of purpose is almost certainly not going to be the thing you end up doing. You know, you're gonna sink a bunch of time thinking this is like the most important problem in the whole world. That exercise will be incredibly valuable. You know, by doing, like, sinking a bunch of time figuring out what's wrong with the field, explaining how you think we should fix it, you know, in whatever way you think. That is a really powerful exercise, but often you'll arrive and your professor will have a wildly different idea from you. And the process of a PhD or a master's is kind of you guys figuring out together how to move forward, working together on something, and that'll change, you know. So it's not like a commitment that you're going to work on this for the rest of your life. Instead, it's just an exercise in showing that you can think critically about what's wrong with the field in some sense, or what's missing from the field. Yeah,
and actually maybe just to address the question that's in the chat about how general or specific this SOP needs to be, just building on what Jason said, it is, in some sense, think of the statement of purpose as the reader is going to be evaluating indeed how you're able to think critically about research itself. So it's not so important that you emphasize really, really strongly exactly what you want the output of your PhD to be. Because exactly like Jason said, in fact, oftentimes there's not going to be, it's not like I'll read your statement and say, aha, this is exactly what I want to do also. The actual research ends up being this negotiation and this very nice dance and collaboration with your actual advisor and your colleagues. And so you don't have to seem very rigid in the topics you want to work on, but I think that if you just kind of are able to highlight some research questions or even some problems in a field, maybe that's kind of the crucial thing, because you're able to show that you can understand a space and identify open questions within that space. And that's not easy to do.
I want to address just a couple. I think this is actually, we're sort of already 5 minutes over what we were planned. I think there's probably some value in very quickly highlighting Roy's statement. I don't know, Dhanya, do you want to pick out some points? But let's just kind of go quickly, and then we'll, because there's some questions about funding in the chat, which I want to make sure we get to that section.
Totally.
And then, yeah.
Totally. And Roy, I assume this is like a snapshot of your statement, right?
Yeah, this is like the first three paragraphs.
Okay. Fantastic. So actually, you know, this is great. We didn't even plan this way, but Roy actually has basically like followed all the tips from the previous slide here. So you see like his first few paragraphs introducing the thing that we talked about, introducing the problem, why, giving some motivation as to why this is actually interesting and important, expressing your vision a little bit. This is all nicely done in the space of about a third of a page to a half a page, and it's done using nice paragraphs. And of course, keep that in mind. Like when I say like structure, you don't have to have each of those be one gigantic paragraph. You can break it up further, but you know, I'm just talking about sort of somewhat clear transitions from theme to next portion to sort of final portion. And so I'm not going to like read all of this in detail, But you see that right away, there's a nice transition from the motivation part to, the concrete experiences that Roy has that will be relevant to why, he can actually work on this research. So to the extent that, you can have your topic sentences of your paragraphs very clearly say things like, in the case of Roy here, he said that in his master's, he specifically had experience to reconcile these two areas of research, and he goes on to give them, right? So to the extent that you can pay attention to your topic sentences and make it clear that, okay, you're about to give some evidence of how your previous background relates to the research vision you've outlined. These are the kinds of writing tricks that you can use to make it very clear to a reader why what's about to come follows very clearly from what you've previously said. Okay, so to just kind of pay attention to these things. But all things to, you can read these slides afterwards, but really, like, this is just a very nice example of the tips that were on the previous slide.
Okay. All right. I'm going to. Okay, so this is now kind of concretely, now you've applied, but what is it that you would get if you were to get in? Kind of what would life look like? There've been a couple of questions about scholarships. In Canada and North America, it is not necessary to have a scholarship in order to get in, right? You don't need, and you literally can't pay your own way. Like, self-funding is not an option in Canada. So like in the UK, I know it is an option where you can, like, if you have enough money, you can pay for yourself to go to grad school. This is just not a thing in Canada, and I don't think it's a thing in the US either. Dhanya, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's certainly not in the well-known schools. So instead, if you have a scholarship, that's great. Sometimes you'll get a little bit of extra money from scholarships. So there are people who have scholarships who get like a top up of additional money on top of the money that they get from the school. So obviously that makes life a little easier. But it's not necessary. And I can speak as someone who kind of got through grad school with on just the basic, not with a scholarship, and I survived. It did help that I had my wife there with me. Being in a relationship helps because you can get a 1-bedroom apartment and pay half the rent. But anyway, so a PhD usually lasts 4 or 5 years. You obviously aim for 4 or less, but it's not unusual for it to take longer. You typically paid, as I said at the top here, like all the numbers in the slide can vary wildly. Take this with a big grain of salt, but this is kind of roughly what to expect. You typically paid around 2,000 Canadian dollars a month. That's 1,700-ish US dollars a month, if you want to do the math, or I don't know, convert to the currency of choice. But the number is almost irrelevant. What matters is how much rent is and how much food is. This does vary, and expensive cities. There are a couple of cities in Canada that are particularly expensive. Toronto and Vancouver are the worst offenders in terms of the cost of housing. Tuition varies a lot. So in a lot of the top schools in Canada, if you get in, for PhDs, you don't pay tuition at all. But this does vary. Sometimes international students pay and local students don't. Sometimes everyone pays. Sometimes you don't. You pay for the first 2 years and then you don't thereafter. So I kind of can't give blanket advice here, but it's just something that like you can look into. Your biggest cost aside from tuition is going to be rent. And Canada's just got a major housing problem. Like there's no kind of easy way around this. Housing is too expensive for everyone, and especially too expensive for grad students. Obviously, you just have to be smart about this. You have to sort of make sure you find a roommate. Ideally, find multiple roommates. I wish I had better advice on this, but it's just rent is too expensive. It's an election issue in Canada, and the schools try and do what they can by trying to raise the stipends, but there's also limited budgets, and so it's just a bad situation all around with that. Roy, do you want to comment on it?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that, like, apart from Vancouver and Toronto, like Montreal is a little bit better with rent, and there are other states in Canada as well that also have pretty good institutions and potentially are a little bit more manageable with rent. There's institutions that come to mind, like University of Alberta. I'm not too sure what the rent looks like there, but potentially the cost of living might be cheaper. So, Canada is not only exclusive to Montreal, Vancouver, and Toronto. So, just think about the grad school life experience think about it holistically. We're just giving you a couple examples, but just think about the whole of Canada.
I think the major point I want to make though on this is it'll be tight, and we'll get to internships on the next page. And if it's especially tight, you should speak to your professor, whoever you're planning to work with. Like, assuming you're in, it's like, imagine a world in which you've made it in, you've got a professor who you're working with, or who you're going to work with, and you're deciding whether or not you can afford to come. Professors don't want to lose you for money reasons. No one wants to be in a situation where you just can't afford to come. And so I think everyone recognizes that this is a problem, and will try and find a way of dealing with this. So like internships, which we mentioned on the next slide, are a great way. If you can get an internship, you can often earn a decent amount of money in the summer, and that can help sort of offset the costs of studying. I don't know, Prudencio and Roy, if you want to comment on this. At least in my case, I was in Vancouver. I was in Vancouver a while ago, so rent has gone up a lot since then. It was supposed to be expensive there. It's even more expensive now. But I was never in a position where I felt like I never went negative in a month. It was just always like really tight, I don't know if that echoes your experience, Roy, or
Yeah, especially during master is very tight, because master, like, even if you have a tight spend, you need to be paying most of the time full price, except in some cases where you are at Mila, for example. So one thing I recommend for people is TA-ing as a great option, as we were saying. So you TA during the winter and fall semester, and then during the summer you do an internship. So I think you kind of in a situation, not the best situation, like, to be honest, but like at least it give you ways to bring money in while you are studying and getting experiences and getting better. So it's definitely doable, and I think most of the people I know didn't have any scholarship during master and PhD, except like the classical assumption of the parent giving them money. But we all made it through, so I think it's definitely doable.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I suppose like that's the thing. It's like we like, I don't want to paint like too rosy picture. It's not like you're going to come and be like living a life of luxury in Canada. It's going to be tight, but you can get through, and like, I wouldn't let this be the reason not to do it. If you and then just
not apply. Yeah.
And
another thing to just mention is that, like, universities have financial aid offices, so these are all things that you can access like after you've applied and often gotten in. So once you apply and let's say you get accepted, you can inquire more into financial aid that the university might provide, or there are in Canada especially, and I can specifically speak to you, Dan and Mila. There's a lot of little small pockets of money that you can apply for. We call them typically fellowships, and they can be anywhere between, let's say, 2K to 5K or 8K. But you can apply for many ones of these, and not all of them are even that selective. Some of them, they give them out just for students that are coming internationally, doing ML research, and who have a need for that kind of money. So there are sort of many other ways to supplement your stipend as a research student as well.
Okay. Last thing on the slide, because we're really running out of time. It's just, yeah, masters does tend to be more expensive. You tighter on money because you're often paid less, and you have to typically pay fees. Just to sort of set expectations, the usual thinking around masters is it's kind of a 2-year thing which you can exit and then go and work in industry. Whereas research, you're treated more like an apprentice, where you need to be paid enough to get by. You're treated not as an employee, but you're not paid as a full salary, but you're paid enough to kind of get by. Whereas masters is treated more like somewhere between a degree at undergrad level that you're paying in order to get ahead, and this apprentice. So you earn less and you pay more for it. But at the end of all of these things, you can also then potentially get jobs that are well paying as well, and so there's that as well. So there is an upside to doing this stuff. Okay, quickly, as I said at the start, machine learning is particularly competitive at the moment. Basically, everything we've said applies to all the disciplines, but machine learning in particular is really competitive. And so it's good to look. When you're sort of applying, it's worth sort of thinking about at least one of your applications being to a place that is not quite as popular as everywhere else. So, for example, on the slide, University of Toronto, Montreal, and because of Mila, UC and University of Alberta are probably the best known places on the slide. Although there are quite a few others that I missed out that could kind of be in that category. But particularly, I think probably U of T, McGill, Montreal, UDM are really popular in machine learning at the moment, and so it's just going to be a flood of applications. Go for it, apply. Don't let that stop you. But also keep in mind that it's not a bad thing to also apply to some of these smaller universities. They often still have excellent people working there, and they can be slightly easier to get into, and you can still do really well. Okay. So the ones, I mean, I can go through them, but I don't really need to them. Just like these are places to look up on these slides. I guess I can speak to Waterloo because that's where I'm a professor. It may not be a place that you've heard of, but it's like pumps out more CS undergrads than I think anywhere else in Canada. It's very well known, especially at an undergrad level in North America. But it's like something that like I wasn't aware of before moving to Canada. Is a sort of example of this. I don't think I did my PhD at UBC. I had a professor at Wits University who had done his PhD at UBC, and that's how I kind of became aware of it. I think without that, I wouldn't have been aware of UBC as an option, and it was excellent, and I've had great opportunities out of that. So, it's very easy to, I mean, in my case, I applied to 5 places. I think 4 of them were very well-known schools in the US, like the Stanfords and Harvards of this world. And I got rejected from all of them, and I got into UBC, and UBC was excellent. It was a truly phenomenally world-class university, but it just wasn't quite as well known, and so it wasn't getting quite as many applications. And so I had more of an opportunity to differentiate myself there. So yeah. Roy, do you want to give a quick overview of your experience?
Yeah, I'm just gonna run through it so that and I'll talk about the key salient point here, just trying to show my experience. So basically, I wanted to just have the first slide literally be my first experience at university. So this is my undergraduate at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, South Africa, which was literally like less than 30 minutes away from my house. So this is the city that I grew up in. So my parents were like, "You're gonna go to the university down the road," and that's exactly what I did. So on the top is just me and my little brother, and then at the bottom is my friend. So I started pretty humbly at the university down the road. So that's the first experience I want to highlight. And then, oh, can you escape and then reload it because I put the picture there?
Sorry. Yeah, it's there. Cool.
So that was that. Then then I moved to the University of Cape Town. So maybe I can speak a little bit towards why I made the move. So I mean, UKZN was really, really great. And I think that's really where I basically fell in love with AI. We had a professor we had one or two professors who kind of were dabbling in this space. And I've just always been interested in computers, and AI was like a really big thing at that time and still is today. And I wanted to explore this area more, and I kind of wanted to go to a bigger university and also leave my parents' house. So I went to the university in Cape Town, and that was really, really nice. And I made a lot of good friends, and it's also a really good university. Like, I know we speak a lot about Canada having world-class universities, but South Africa and Africa as a whole has some really good universities. And a lot of my friends from this university are in like very nice places, some of which are like working for like Google here in Canada and in the States. So that's just a bit on that experience. After that, not much like Jason, I decided to pursue the master's at Wits, which is the university in Johannesburg. And this is maybe another conversation altogether, but there are some really interesting AI labs in South Africa and in Africa as a whole, and this was one of them. So this was actually a lab founded by Benjamin Rossman, who did his PhD in the UK and then decided to come back to South Africa and create a lab. And I kind of just heard that he was back. And when I was in Cape Town, I basically kind of just stalked him and asked if I can join his lab, and he was kind enough to say, sure, you can come. He was mostly working on RL, and I didn't really have much interest in RL, so I just kind of begged him and said, I don't want to work on that. Can I work on backpropagation? Which was great, but I mean, there's pros and cons to it. Like, it's advantages to work on a research area that is directly related to what your professor does. But then again, it also allowed me the opportunity to explore the area that I really wanted to look into. So that was my experience in my master's. So next slide. I think in the next slide, I will highlight, I think, what was the differentiating factor for me. I think a lot of people speak towards, I mean, up until now, we've spoken a lot about transcripts and writing your statement of purpose, but at its core, well, one major aspect of academia is this aspect of social interactions and networking and really engaging with other researchers. And I think that for me was a massive key. I think, from the context of Africa, there's actually a lot of opportunities for Africans to go to conferences and summer schools often on a scholarship because they're trying to increase representation. And, I took full advantage of that. So here, for example, to the bottom left was a summer school in Cape Town, a computational neuroscience summer school, which was it was a game changer for my research experience. And to the right, I was fortunate enough to go to California, in California, in America, to present my work at Black in AI, which was, a conference at NeurIPS, which is one of the big AI conferences, and they made a little workshop for Black researchers, which I participated in. And through this experience, I really got to meet a lot of people, like people that I'm friends, like my best friends today come from these conferences. And in the next slide,
I think that's where you and I met.
Yes, we did actually. We actually did meet at this conference, that exact conference. That's true.
I mean, there's a good example of this. Like, I know really from that.
Just to add on this, like, if you are here and you are Black and you haven't been in Black in AI, make it your goal to be to the next one, because like it will just help you tremendously. And see, because not many people take advantage of this, but if you take advantage of this, you will meet great people. You will also get a lot of experience by just participating. And definitely for application, that's something worth highlighting.
Exactly. And I kind of wanted to take this picture because this picture is very like emblematic. Unfortunately, there's one person missing here, but this was the summer school that I went to in Cape Town. But there was also a summer school that I went to in Argentina as well, which was also all expenses paid and was a beautiful experience. But in this picture, if you move to the next slide, this picture was the reason why I basically got my PhD. So that's my advisor over there, Blake Richards, and then at the bottom is Tim Vogels, who wrote my letter of recommendation and also offered me a PhD position. Like, I literally got the PhD because I sat in those lectures and Blake was giving a talk and he was just like, you asked really good questions. Do you want to do a PhD? That's how it started. I would have never imagined applying to McGill because I was like, I don't know, like the imposter syndrome, but due to being in this space, you get to meet people. And I think Blake was very kind enough to offer me the position. And obviously there's other things that follow with that, but it was really through this experience that I got this beautiful opportunity to pursue a PhD. So next slide. Also through that same summer school, I was fortunate enough to do an internship in London at the Gatsby unit through Peter Latham, which was an amazing experience. And this was also one of the contributing factors for me getting into the PhD, because I worked with researchers, and Gatsby is really, really nice. They kind of have this like corridor, or like they have this very good partnership with DeepMind. So I was able to also meet people there. So it was a very beautiful experience as well. And then next slide. Yeah, so the last thing is that, like, finally got the PhD. And I just want to kind of emphasize that the PhD is a beautiful journey with a lot of ups and downs. And, as much as I'm glad people are showing interest in it, I also kind of want to have this conversation. It's not on a somber note, but like, it's something that I think people should really, consider if it's something that is really for them or not. As much as it's a beautiful journey, like there's a lot of things that come with it that you should also take into account. But nevertheless, I don't regret my decision in doing the PhD. And these are pictures from our lab Christmas party, and these are also some very good friends that I have today. And I really wish for you all to share the same experiences that I have. So that's a bit about my experiences. I'm open to questions that you guys might have as well.
Cool.
Have to leave now, but like
Just
you are in great hands, and Jason, now you are the host, so you can end this whenever you feel like. See everyone.
That's pretty chill.
Thanks, Prudencio.
All right.
That was such a cool story, by the way, Roy. That was amazing.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try and top that. Like I had the next slide, but we talked enough about me. So if there's any more questions that we haven't addressed in the chat, maybe just like reply to them so they pop to the bottom, and we can answer them. But I think that's basically where we'll end it. Okay.
How do we get started? Yes, great question. So application season is starting to roll in. So I mean, certainly now is a good time to start scouring social media, scouring, props, web pages at these some of these universities we mentioned today, to see who's hiring, who isn't, who's doing interesting work. And then, just pay attention to the application deadlines, and I would say, just start working towards it.
And I think maybe just on could be asking about how we get started on mentors and internships. Sorry,
okay, yes.
And it's like, so pay attention. I mean, obviously, there's this we advertised on the Machine Learning Africa, Machine Learning Data Science Africa Google group. That's a great resource. Black and AI is a great resource, especially like following them on Twitter. I realized Twitter is all over the place. Sorry, x.com. But it's still a great resource for finding out what's happening, especially if you follow places like Black and AI. And then just, yeah, I mean, all the major conferences, NeurIPS and ICML and iClear will typically have some sort of some workshops. They call them these affiliate workshops. Yeah, am I getting it right?
Affinity workshops.
Affinity workshops. Sorry, I knew I was getting it wrong. Affinity workshops, like Black in AI, and there are a number of others, which will often have opportunities for coming and visiting the conference with funding. And then summer schools, as Roy mentioned, are fantastic. Like they're actually a much better opportunity than conferences, because you're kind of there for a couple of days. It's smaller. You're interacting with the professor more in a kind of almost like a teaching environment, but that you're having lunch together. You have a lot of opportunities to talk to each other. So they're great.
For research internships in particular, just like with grad school applications, a lot of profs will announce this on their page if they are open for hiring interns, looking for interns actively. It may be also posted on some kind of open positions page for these various institutes like Mila, Vector, and so forth. The other thing is, as much as my advice for grad student applications was don't email directly, for internship applications, it is a little bit more okay to email the prof directly. But again, keep your email really concise, keep it clear, keep it as pertinent to their research experience as possible. These we do kind of open more regularly and pay attention to, just because like interns, it's a much lower commitment. And so, you know, we're always looking for strong interns and so forth. So yes, you can feel free to email profs directly about internship opportunities, but keep those emails, follow the same guidelines that we gave for the research statement for those emails.
Yeah. I'm going to follow up with Molef's question about if we want to apply. Do you apply for a scholarship first or apply directly? So in North America, apply directly first. Don't worry about scholarships. You don't have to have a scholarship at all. So it's not required. The funding will come if you're accepted. In the UK, it's more complicated. They do require scholarships, I think, or I think you apply to the school and then apply for scholarships. I'm sorry, I don't know that system as well. I do know you need to get separate scholarships in the UK, and I guess that's maybe, I think that's just maybe one reason to just focus on North America if you're worried about that. I mean, I think scholarships are available in the UK as well. The process is just way more complicated. I know it was like, speaking from my own experience, that was one of the things that put me off from the UK. It was just like navigating that. I knew I couldn't afford to pay my own way, and yeah, so I couldn't figure out how the scholarship thing worked, and so I ended up just going to North America. All right, what have we got? So is it possible to apply for a PhD if we still have a couple of months left to finish my master's? Yes, it is. So it is possible to apply for a PhD if you still have time left in your master's. You only have to have graduated by the time you start, which is like, if you were applying now in December, you'd start in September next year. And so as long as you finish your master's by June, July next year, you'd be fine. Before getting these opportunities, how do I prepare for them? Where can I get resources? This is a great question. I guess it depends on the kind of resource we're talking about. So like research-specific resources, I don't know, there's just almost too many resources to know where to start. It's sort of helpful to kind of narrow down to find an area of interest, and given that area of interest, then lean into it. I mean, I think just basically figure out the areas that you, I mean, and so even narrower than machine learning. So obviously machine learning, yes, but then like kind of, is there a sub area of machine learning that you're interested in? I would, maybe the easiest thing to start with is just like watch a lot of talks of cases that of machine learning talks from the various conferences. So you can go on to all of the conferences. Eventually become free. They paid initially, but they all eventually publish all their material free. You can go and watch the keynotes. That's a good place to start. Gives you a sort of high level idea of what people are interested in. Although they tend to be often a bit broader than but you can certainly watch like the orals, the sort of highlighted popular things. Those might be more technical or too technical, but kind of don't be discouraged if they sound really technical. That's okay. Just like to say, okay, well, what would I need to figure out in order to understand this talk? And then you can start kind of backfilling your education. There's just such amazing resources on YouTube at the moment, on the internet, that like you can get a lot of information. I mean, I have a PhD and a postdoc, and I'm becoming a professor, and there's still things I look up on YouTube. There's just a lot of good material, and it just helps to focus your search around what you were interested in, because otherwise you can just become completely overwhelmed. Right?
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit somewhat related in terms of just, how to prepare for these opportunities, as in terms of like also the resources. I mean, I have like colleagues who because there's one, like I kind of did a similar thing where I'd basically like just try and learn more about machine learning and the theory and take online courses and things like that. But I think another approach that's also pretty interesting is taking a project-based approach. So, picking up a project, saying, you want to do like facial recognition, you want to create an AI system that does facial recognition, and just learning how to do this and sort of like putting all your efforts into trying to build something. I think that's also one way to really learn more about a field or a space, instead of taking the more academic route of like, sitting in talks and trying to understand the fundamentals behind the technology. So, just getting your hands dirty is also one way. It's one approach to learning more about the space.
Great. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think it's often easier to learn if you've got something in mind. Okay, there's a question about seeking to be, data engineers to get admission into PhD or machine learning or intern opportunities at the best AI organization. Yeah, so this is obviously someone who's already in industry and looking to try and do a PhD in machine learning or intern opportunities in the AI organizations. I think the challenge there is finding ways of turning your work into stuff that will like look good on an application. So doing like, often if you're in industry, you can't necessarily share your projects that you're working on in industry, but so then you sort of need to try and find ways of doing maybe some open source work on the side, or maybe some small research project, maybe writing blog posts, like some way of kind of showing kind of what you're learning about separately from your day-to-day work, because you kind of want to try and show that you can kind of engage in the research community and not just apply the tools that the research community uses. And so, having said that, the other thing that could be useful if you're in an area that you already like is trying to apply to like something that is like connected to the industry you're working in. So you can potentially find, like, if you're in an area that you like and you find a professor who's working in that area, you might be able to find synergy there. So it could potentially differentiate yourself on that. logistics around Mila. Roy, have you answered this? Sorry, I'm sort of reading this while I'm going. Yeah, so I think broadly, like if you get an internship somewhere, Dhanya, do you know if you've taken research interns yet?
I have, and they've even come internationally. So I mean, Roy is right. So we do try to provide as much help in terms of logistics as we can. Of course, we give a stipend in terms of salary and so forth. And unlike an actual graduate program, you don't really have fees when you're an intern, so you don't have to worry about things like tuition and student fees. The key thing is finding housing, and for this, what I definitely recommend is to students, once you're kind of in the system, you can often be added to something like a Slack channel or some kind of resource like that. At Mila, we have a Slack, for example, and I have encouraged my students to go and post in the housing channel. And most universities have some kind of forum like this where the students are talking about subletting their apartment and so forth as they leave for summer internship. So this is one of the best ways to kind of find housing temporarily in a city. But there's also things like international student housing on the campus itself. And we do our best when we hire interns to give links and resources, pointers to these kinds of resources. So that's maybe what I can say about support in terms of logistics.
There's a question about if you're already a PhD student, is it possible to apply for a postdoc? Absolutely. So obviously, if you're already a PhD student, you'll have more of a clear idea of the kind of work you're doing. You'll have a research area of some kind, and you'll know people who are kind of good in your field. And so keep in mind that actually it's an amazing time to be a postdoc, because it's really hard to hire good postdocs at the moment, because there's just a lot of good postdocs end up going into industry. And so there are really, the great postdoc opportunities out there if you I mean, obviously the challenge is having a good sort of nice body of research that when you're talking to a potential advisor. The other thing you can do during your PhD is internships during your PhD as well. So you can go and spend some time at another lab as an intern while you're a PhD. Those kinds of opportunities are possible. And that's a good way of developing a relationship with a person who either then is going to be a postdoc advisor or who will write a letter for you to get to another postdoc. So it's a nice way you can do this. I have an MSc in computer information systems. Can I apply for a PhD in machine learning? Yes, I think I agree with Roy. Like, CS tends to be pretty, it seems to be pretty open to people who are outside of traditional machine learning, especially in North America. There's kind of less of a culture of like you have to follow one path in order to get into machine learning. I'm someone who's like very much a machine learning CS person now. I'm going to go and be a professional CS, but I had a lot more economics in my undergrad and masters even before applying. I ended up doing another master's in computer science before PhD, so you may end up being in that situation. It's not guaranteed that you'll go straight into the PhD program. That'll obviously depend on wherever you choose to apply. But it's not required that you follow like CS all the way in order to get into a CS PhD. All right, I think we should probably wrap this up. It's gone way longer than I intended, but thank you guys so much for the questions and for coming. And yeah, we'll try and post it. I'll just try and post it on the post this recording. Yes, I'll send it to the same group, the Machine Learning Data Science Africa Google group. And I don't know, if you enjoyed it, feel free to send an email to that session if you found it helpful. Maybe we'll do it again sometime. Because yeah. Cool. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.